I'm Dr. David Bernstein, and welcome back to our series 25 Tips for Working with Modes. Now, last time we talked about the importance of building islands of strength. That if you can help somebody to, achieve, relatively good functioning in at least one area of his life, that becomes the solid ground that he can stand on and helps him to improve his overall level of functioning. And today I'd like to take this topic further. I'd like to talk about, how can you help people to, initiate and maintain behavioral changes in their lives, behavioral changes in which they use their strengths. And that brings us to the topic for today. It's the little things. Now, when it comes to making behavioral changes, there's a lot that we know about this process. And, we know about this, from, the classical behaviorists, have a lot of very good advice, based on experience of how to help people, make concrete changes in their lives. And, the first piece of advice is start small. Even if you have a large goal, begin with a small step. And in fact, what you want to do is take that whole process of behavioral change and break it down into a series of small steps. And then for each step the patient takes, you want to give him lots of praise and other forms of reinforcement. And we know in practice that this process doesn't always go smoothly. And so when you run into problems, oftentimes it means that the step is too big. And so you then simply go and break that step again into smaller steps. So the idea is you want to have, you want people to have success experiences. You want, even though those steps may seem very, very small, you want them to take those steps and to succeed at them, to feel like they've got a win, and, then to, that to motivate them to go on and take the next step. Okay, now this kind of approach works really well, and I tend to use it a lot myself in my own work when it comes to helping people make behavioral changes. However, one of the things that we know, and it's especially true for patients who have more severe problems, that very often the process of making behavioral changes is like, feels like taking one step forward and two steps back. And why is that? Well, from a schema therapy perspective, we would say that the reason for that is because of their modes. That modes get triggered when people want to initiate changes, right? So remember that, when we're trying to make changes, we're asking people to push themselves out of their comfort zones. And that can be emotionally triggering. And oftentimes then those modes get in the way of making precisely the kinds of changes we want people to make. And so what I recommend is using an approach that combines a number of things that we've talked about in this course. It combines mindful awareness. It combines an awareness of the process of, feeding one's modes, and also it combines the idea of, helping people to utilize their strengths. And the idea here is that when, if you want to help people to build their strengths, by, putting behavioral changes into practice, it's a matter of making small, everyday choices. And those choices are based on mindful awareness, particularly, mindful awareness at those moments when one's modes are triggered. And let's take a look at how this process works. So, imagine you've, given the patient a, behavioral assignment, to go out and do something, to utilize their strengths in a particular way, a particular concrete way, and they run into trouble. Well, what's going on? Very often their modes are being triggered. And the first thing that you want to do is to have them slow things down a little bit in those moments and bring mindful awareness to their experience. The moment that you bring mindful awareness to your experience, you start to change the mode. And how does this work? Well, what it feels like is a kind of softening of the mode. That's what it often feels like. That rather than acting upon your mode as if it's real and then feeding the mode by doing things that reinforce it, Instead, you slow things down. You don't have to act on it. You just simply bring awareness to your mode. And you can liken this to, the process of mixing paints of different colors together. You remember when you were a kid and you discovered that if you mixed paints of different color, you could get new colors, right? So imagine now that the mode is in blue paint and, mindful awareness is in yellow paint. And now that you bring that awareness to the mode, the mode begins to change color. And then, what emerges is a new color, green, which represents choice, right? And this brings us back to, Viktor Frankl's idea that between stimulus and response, there is a moment that represents our inner freedom, and that our inner freedom is then our opportunity to make a choice. And as we discussed before in this course, those choices often involve either giving in to old patterns by feeding our modes, or feeding our healthy adult mode, which means, doing something different, doing something new. Okay. Now, how does this process work in practice? Well, what I recommend is that patients learn to ask themselves a series of questions at those moments when they're emotionally triggered. And some of these questions I refer to as awareness questions, which are the yellow questions. And some of them are choice questions, which are the green questions. And I'm going to illustrate this process, with the case of Ron that we've been using. Remember, Ron is the patient who has these repeating fights with his girlfriend, often over, his desire for autonomy. So let's talk, first of all, let's go through this process, starting with the awareness questions. Now imagine Ron is with his girlfriend, and he's facing this kind of dilemma where he wants to go out at night with his friends, and even when he just starts thinking about it, he starts to feel angry, and that's his angry child mode. And why is that? Because he's anticipating he's going to get into some kind of conflict or struggle with her where she doesn't want him to go out, and he does. And even before he opens his mouth and says anything to her, already he's emotionally triggered. Okay, so this is the moment where you want him to bring mindful awareness to his experience. And the first question you want him to ask is this real, or am I in a mode? Well, in most situations, there is some mixture of, external reality and what we bring to our experience. And that's the case for Ron too. His girlfriend may have issues of her own. She may feel insecure, and as a result may actually try to control him in certain kinds of ways. And yet that doesn't mean that that's the end of the story. It takes two to tango, and so Ron brings himself to his experience. And so at that moment when he's triggered, he can ask, is this real? Or am I in a mode? And even if there is some reality to his perception of, the situation, it doesn't mean he's not also in a mode. And certainly, everything indicates that he is, particularly because his body is now experiencing all of the kinds of physical sensations that go along with being in an angry child mode. And so the next step is to let himself feel his mode. Can I feel my mode? What does my mode feel like in my body? And so he's, anchoring his mode within himself. Okay? Now he can really feel his mode. He's really even more convinced, yeah, I'm in a mode. And now the next question is, can I accept my mode? Rather than having to act from my mode, by, let's say, starting a fight with his girlfriend, which in his case would just be a matter of feeding his mode and making the pattern worse, can I, rather than acting, can I just be with my mode and accept it, just to allow my mode to be? My angry child mode is a part of me. I know that. I know it didn't start with, with my girlfriend, that's been a part of me for a long time, and it's something that I bring to my experience. And can I just accept my mode and allow it to be? Now, if Ron can just simply go through these three questions, he's already begun to change his mode. His mode has already begun to soften. And as a result, he is starting to create that moment of inner freedom where he can exercise a choice. And now, how does he go further? Now he can ask himself a series of three choice questions. The first question is, can I use my strengths? In this situation, I have a choice to make. I can do something that feeds my mode, or I can feed my healthy adult mode by using my strengths here. So what kinds of strengths can Ron use in this situation with his girlfriend? Well, we know that he's somebody with a lot of empathy and compassion. So one of the things that he could do in that situation is just to stop and, have some empathy for the side of his girlfriend that feels insecure, and to realize that part of, her getting triggered in the situation, her need to control him, comes from her insecurity, right? So he's using his empathy. At the same time, Ron needs to have some empathy and compassion for himself, right? He's good at having compassion for others, but not so good at having compassion for himself. He tends to criticize himself, right? And seeing himself as not good enough. But if Ron can have some compassion for the dilemma that he's in, and to realize how hard it is for him, given his history, to let himself be close to somebody and still feel that he has the right to be autonomous. You gotta have some compassion for that little child inside of him that feels, stuck, and feels stuck with an impossible dilemma between attachment and autonomy. Then Ron can actually more, tap into his vulnerability. And that may help him to start to imagine doing something different in the situation, because that's ultimately what we would like him to do, to be able to make a choice using his strengths to do something different, even something small. And at that moment, it begins with imagining doing something different. What could Ron do that might be different? Well, one of the things he could do that's different, would be, maybe to recognize that he also has needs for connection, that it's not just his girlfriend who needs that, and that he needs autonomy. And maybe he can make some choices sometimes, to be with her, to do things that'll help him feel closer to her, that will nourish that side of himself that also needs connection. Maybe making a choice on a particular evening to stay home, hang out with her, go watch television, or, play games, or do something fun, do something that they like to do together. And maybe, also make a choice to make plans, for another evening to go out with his friends, so that he has the ability to make attachment choices and make autonomy choices. Now, it starts with imagining doing something. And, Ron deserves praise for even doing that. And so part of the process here is, to ask the question, can I praise myself? Can I give myself a win for any of these steps, for asking any of those awareness questions, or asking any of these choice questions? Because you want people to reinforce themselves. Just simply, if Ron can just simply stop and think about, how could I use my strengths here, that's a win. And if he could imagine doing something different, even a small thing, even just imagining doing it, that's a win too. And then, perhaps Ron can actually make a small change to try something out, do a kind of behavioral experiment. He has his expectation of, what will happen, if he, does X or does Y. But maybe he can actually try it out in practice. Try doing something different, something small, and then he can praise himself as well. Okay, so in addition to doing the classical behavioral moves that we talked about, if you can help your patients to go through these steps, it can help them in those moments in which they're emotionally triggered. And getting into these habits, can help them on a daily basis because those patterns are deeply ingrained. And so this process of bringing mindful awareness to your experience and then asking yourself a series of questions to initiate some small changes, over time can help people to utilize their strengths on a more consistent basis. Okay. Now next time we're going to talk about a little bit more about the process of working with strengths and working with modes, because actually what I'm recommending is an integrated approach that uses both of them, and that will bring us to the video for next week, Do the Tango. And finally, I'd like to invite you to come to our website, www.imodes.com, and take a look at our image-based therapy tools. Have a great week and see you next time.